One of the things I've talked about often on this channel is that we should not be comparing our first draft manuscript with published, edited books. And yet, I find that these comparisons are so persistent. And they don't just happen at the book level either, they also happen at the idea level. And that's why today I want to talk about 5 tips to hone your book idea before you ever start writing. Stay tuned. I'm Dr. Amanda Nell Edgar, the founder of Page and Podium Press. Every expert author's book is unique, and one of the things that we in the book industry are called to do is to draw out that uniqueness and meet every author where they are. And that's why I created the Expert Author Quiz. This freebie is going to give you a chance to go through the most common questions that I use to diagnose where folks are on their book journey. The quiz takes 3 to 5 minutes, and when you're done, you'll get a full readout of other authors just like you who have made it big in the industry, as well as the strengths you've got, the likely weaknesses along the way, and of course, some practical, personalized advice on how to best move forward. You can take the quiz now at pageandpodium.com/quiz. When you set out to write a book that really showcases your unique position, whether this is a position that you have in the nonprofit world, whether you are doing advocacy work, whether you are a speaker, somebody who works with clients, I often find that the folks that I work with who really want to make sure that their perspective and idea come through, really carry that weight, are often very afraid that their idea isn't good enough. Now, this can sound lots of ways. Sometimes people will say, I'm not sure if I have enough for a book. Sometimes people will say, I'm not sure if I'm ready, if that's you. But however this ends up showing up, oftentimes what I find is at the root is a comparison of a raw, rough idea, oftentimes that has not really been shared with anyone, to an idea that got a book to the New York Times bestseller list. And unfortunately, for many, many reasons, these are simply not comparable. When we see any finished published book, that book, not only the book, but the idea as part of the book, has been through the ringer. Not only, oftentimes, was there editing along the way of the actual book, which, yes, does help to hone the idea. Also, oftentimes, that author really did a lot of development work, a lot of market testing, but also a lot of self-reflection, a lot of digging into themselves before the book ever started to be written. And what I find is that it is easy to want to skip over this idea development process for a lot of reasons. But when we actually pause and take the time to hone that idea, the entire writing process becomes much, much easier, more enjoyable, and ultimately effective. Now, I want to give you an example of kind of what this can look like because I see this in real time all of the time. Now, I have been working with a client for about a year now, and we were working in a coaching agreement. His book will be out at the end of this fall, so watch for that. I'll put out a little announcement on the newsletter, so make sure that you follow pageandpodium.com/blog. You can get signed up. In this book, this author really wanted to share some bits of life wisdom. Now, this is a big-time tech startup guy, so he has a lot of stuff to share about things like business, entrepreneurship, startup life, financing, work-life balance, etc. But he also was really wanting to make sure that this book had a lot of wisdom that was just for living. In fact, the book is called The Character Code because in addition to the information that he wanted to share, just about success in his view, he really wanted to make sure that it was all fit under an umbrella of being a really good person. Now, the way that this relates to the idea is that while this idea had been something he had been sitting with for actually quite some time, what we found when we started digging into the actual writing process after we had even done some development was that when he got to the essays, the chapters in his book that he had really talked a lot about, they just flew off the page. And you know what else? They were great. I could always tell when he sent me a chapter to read, and it was a chapter he had done a lot of speaking on, a lot of writing on, talking with people on, because the ideas were not only so clear, they were so well developed. He could anticipate the objections that his audience might have. He had very, very strong stories and examples that he had practiced and refined. And he knew exactly how to move through the points in a way that would make sense. Whereas when we worked on the chapters, this is a book of essays, by the way, when we worked on the chapters that were newer, oftentimes the more personal things that he wanted to share that he didn't do a lot of speaking on, we would really have to stop, pause, and talk through what those ideas were. Once we did that, once we honed them, once we dialed them in, really got them into thought parameters that felt good for him, then he could write those chapters almost, not quite, almost as easily as the ones that he had been speaking on already. And this is not an anomaly. I see this all the time. The more developed our ideas are, the easier it is to write, and the better the book will turn out. So, oftentimes I find there is a little bit of an impulse to hide the idea. Folks are a little bit afraid to share the idea with others because they're afraid it will get stolen or they'll get scooped or whatever the issue might be. But let me tell you, it is going to be worth it to take this leap of faith, to get out there and develop that idea, because truly, every single part about writing this book will be better, easier, more enjoyable if you can pause and develop your idea before diving in. Okay, so with that, let's get to the ways that you can practically hone your book idea. Well, the first thing I want to suggest is that you work with a professional. Now, I know this may seem a little bit of overkill. And one thing that I do find very often is that folks will assume they need to write the book first before they bring in a professional. And while this can work, depending on where you are, depending on how confident you are, depending on how well in tune you are with your idea already, you may be able to make this work. I also find that if there's any shakiness in what you're trying to say, what you're trying to do, how committed you are to a particular take over another take, how you need help with your angling, depending on a variety of factors, it can actually save you a fair amount of money to seek out a professional before you start writing to make sure the idea is dialed in. Now, what can this look like? Because actually, you have many, many options here. Now, I know some of the folks that I'm speaking with in this particular video are likely already working with some type of coach. This may be a speaker coach, it may be a book coach. Oftentimes, it's going to be a business or leadership coach, a marketing messaging coach, that kind of a thing. If you already have a professional like that in your back pocket, that is gold. If you've already got somebody that knows how you think about things, how you approach things, what your goals are for your life, business, whatever it may be, it is so, so, so helpful to have someone that already knows that stuff that can really help push you on what your central ideas are. But if you don't, let me tell you that there are many, many options of folks that you can work with. And what this often looks like is just simply some time container in which you are meeting with someone who is trained in pulling out those ideas, in helping to kind of push you in places you haven't thought, ask a lot of follow-up questions, offer alternatives, often, this happens when I work with clients, often offer other people who are saying similar things and pushing that author to distinguish how they are different. Side note, they almost always are, just haven't thought about it that way yet. But as we move through whatever that time-bounded container is, that's often just giving you time to sit with those ideas. Now, we are all so busy. In 2026, we all have so much on our plate. And just having this time set aside with someone who is trained in pulling those ideas out from you, it is going to be gold. So if that is something that would be useful for you, reach out to me anytime. You can reach out at pageandpodium.com/contact. We offer these as month-long engagements as well as VIP days. So if it would be helpful to have someone just work with you, pull those ideas out, please let me know. It is one of my very favorite services that we offer, and it can have a huge return on the investment. So that is to say, the first tip is work with a professional. If that is something that is possible for you, I find that across the board, it not only helps make the book easier and better, it also really helps with whatever you're trying to do with the book. So if you're wanting to speak about it, if you're wanting to teach about it, having those ideas really brought into clarity, really having somebody help you pull out the differentiator, the thing that you're doing differently, that can be gold. So first tip, find a professional who can help you with this step. Okay, my second tip on honing these ideas before you start writing. If you are somebody who is wanting to speak, who's wanting to teach, so I think mostly who I'm speaking to in this video, it might be worth your while to go ahead and start doing that before the book comes out. Now, before you turn off this video, I know that often lands as very strange advice. People often find it very odd that I am suggesting that. But let me tell you, as someone who has a podcast, there is nothing that is going to refine your ideas more than having to just talk about them for a long time every single week. The more you are talking about your ideas, the more you're not only getting feedback from your audience, although yes, but you also get feedback from yourself because you will find that there are particular ideas that when you talk about them, they light you up. And when you get that little bit of feedback from yourself, well, now you can really dial in. You can say, all right, this subtopic, actually, there is more here. I want to explore this. And if you have begun to set up the infrastructure for however you want to speak or teach, online, in person, whatever it may be, you now have this sort of playground. You have this contained space where you can bring the ideas out. You can see how they land, again, not only with your audience, but also with yourself. So most nonfiction authors do wait too long to start building up their platform. Let me just encourage you, start right now. You can have the book in mind, and in fact, you are doing something that will be very, very good for the book if you are doing this sharing, speaking, teaching. But start doing it now and see where that takes you. See what that tells you about what type of book you want to write, about where you want to focus. Because I guarantee starting it now and realizing how you want to hone things based on evidence is going to be way better than getting that book written and then finding out you don't even like talking about this topic. So let's start now, build that platform, and use that to really hone and refine your ideas. Okay, the third tip that I want to give you, no one will be surprised to hear me say this. It has to do with journaling. Y'all know I love to journal. But what I want you to do specifically is I want you to journal on the parts of your idea that seem worth glossing over. Now, I'm going to break this into two because there's two ways that this shows up. The first way, this is particularly true if the thing you are writing about is at all emotional or sensitive to you, is you are very, very likely to want to gloss over the things that make you emotionally uncomfortable. But friends, this is where the gold of your story lives. So if you are finding that there are aspects of your healing, aspects of your struggle, aspects of your confusion, even your confusion today, by the way, if you are finding that there are aspects that feel a little murky and you're just feeling like, well, I don't need to get into that anyway, that's too personal, that's too private, I don't want to get that vulnerable. All right. Well, let's just say that's okay for now, but I want you to go into your journal and I want you to write about what you're afraid of. Why do you want to gloss over that? What would it mean for you to really engage with it? What would you learn if you did that? And I want you to use those safe, protected journal pages, not the pages of your published book. You should use those safe pages to really journal on what those things are. If you were going to write about them, if you thought anybody would care, if you thought anyone would benefit from it, what would you write? Often what I find is if you can do this exercise enough times, it's not a one and done. If you can do this exercise enough times, you will actually start to find that there are things you are hiding from yourself that are crucially important to the topic you're trying to cover. Often these are the things that will make your book unique while still fitting within the landscape of books. That is the dream we all want. And oftentimes, this is actually going to give you meat that you thought you didn't have. Usually, once you crack this egg open, there is no more doubt that you don't have enough for a book, because you do. Once you have cracked into the stuff that you are avoiding, there it is. So that's the first kind of sub way that I want you to think of journaling about what you're trying to leave out. Second way, more boring. In this case, I want you to actually dig down into the basics. If you think of your idea as kind of up here, up here in the sky, up here at maybe the 10,000-foot view. I guarantee that underneath that idea, we have some kind of strings coming down from that hot air balloon of an idea, things that are grounding that idea. These are often the premises, the things that need to be true for the idea to hold. They're often the mechanics, the logistics, the things that need to happen for the idea to actually materialize. They're oftentimes kind of baseline scientific observations, psychological observations. They're the things that you have experienced in your day-to-day life. These are the details, right? And those are the things that go into the structure of that larger idea. Well, often what I find is that at least some of those on the ground details are things we haven't really interrogated because we kind of just take them for granted, right? But y'all, oftentimes, again, there is gold, not just simply to telling people things that they've already heard, the basic things, but rather to explaining those basic things through the lens of your larger idea. Because oftentimes the simple things we take for granted, that's actually where the growth is for your reader. So can we take this philosophy, this perspective idea that you've got and really help shape kind of the sub ideas, not just the larger idea? It's going to be gold. I think about this a lot when I'm following some of the folks that are talking about AI, right? There's a lot of folks that are talking about how AI is just changing the world and it's awful and I'm very scared about it, to be totally honest with y'all. But what I have found the most helpful are actually the breakdowns that look into what are the assumptions that AI is making and what are the baseline mechanics of how it works. Because once you understand that, then all of the larger things, the larger kind of scary pieces, at least we have some way in, right? We can at least understand them. And that makes it feel so much more actionable. It makes that knowledge feel so much more actually practical. And honestly, it is very reassuring to know that there is some kind of a structure, right? So let's give that to your readers. What are the kind of boring, simple things that you are glossing over and avoiding because you don't think anybody cares? What if instead you realize that you also have a unique view on those boring, simple things, even if you haven't been talking about it before? Well, just like with the deeper, vulnerable stuff, I want you to journal on this. What are the actual implications of taking some of those details and combining them with the larger idea? What do you find if you dig in there? What if you had to write a letter to your fifth grade nephew about how this particular thing works? How would you say it? What would you want to make sure he knew so that he wasn't being influenced by other people unduly over you? What would you write? Journal on this. Think about what makes sense to share with your reader because oftentimes there's more here than you think. Okay, so that's my third tip. My fourth tip, I want you, if you have been building this readership, if you have building this audience, whether that is, thousands of people that you've never met or your friends and family and community members, I want you to actually go straight to the source. If you are trying to reach these folks as your audience, as your readers, it is important that you know what's going on with them. So I want you to reach out to these folks and I want you to ask them, where are they struggling right now? In fact, if you can even have an ongoing conversation where you can ask some questions, you can gather some information, you can even, especially if you're a little newer to coaching, advising, teaching, you can offer them some solutions and see how they react. Oftentimes, not only is this going to be a really good boost if you are newer to the work that you're wanting to do, it often can really help you dial into what's happening now. I do find that sometimes as business owners, I am one too, we get really caught up in our day-to-day and we can really just default to the things that we've always been talking about in the ways we've always been talking about them. And while people are appreciative, people do need to hear things more than once. It is also really helpful to think about, what are some of the cultural contexts that have changed? What are some of the things in society that are a little bit different that are now shaping how my audience, my reader, is seeing some of these issues? I'm not saying, certainly, that you want to be changing your idea every time the winds of change blow. Rather, what I want to suggest is, if you have not dug in, if you've not honed that idea, your audience and your reader can be an excellent way to do that. So don't be afraid to reach out to them. Don't be afraid to share that you're working on a book and you're wanting to kind of gather some of the newer perspectives. Often people will be so grateful for an opportunity to help you. So let's use that help. Let's use that community. Books are never written by ourselves, so we might as well pull other people in. And my final tip for honing that book idea is remember that your topic and your story are not separate. There is a reason you are interested in that topic, and I promise it is not just some objective chance. Always, when we are pulled into a topic, it is because there is some part of us personally that pulled us into that topic. Now, this is something that we used to actually kind of laugh about when I was in grad school as someone who really straddled humanities and social sciences, but who was in a program that was incredibly social science heavy. We were often encouraged to really think of our topics as kind of an objective thing that we were studying. We objectively cared about it. It was passionless. We were removing all of our bias from the picture. Now, I don't believe that's possible, and I never believed that was possible. I think even the hardest hard science people are driven by particular investments in their life to study the things that they study. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But one thing I would ask, if you are someone who is saying, I am just passionless, I am just drawn by chance to my topic that I look at objectively, I want to ask you, then why do you care enough about it to write a book? All of us are connected to our topics by our lived experience. And I often find that folks will be hesitant to share their own lived experience as a way to share their knowledge because they feel like using their own story almost lessens their expertise. Almost like, well, if I really was an expert, I wouldn't use my own story, right? I would use other people's stories. Friends, this is not the way. With readers, we want to get to know you. And as long as we only get to read other people's stories, we're not ever going to get that real connection with who you are, what you want us to know, and why you care so much that we know it. So, do not be afraid to use your personal story. There are tons of books that follow this order at Page and Podium. This is actually what we do best. And I want you to really think about, are there ways in which, even if you have a degree, even if your expertise is verified, documented, are there ways that your lived experience can also fit within that umbrella? And I want to close with an example that I actually think hits a lot of these points about honing your idea. Now, this is a client that we've been working with for a while, Yolanda Bogart. She is working on a book about autism, about working with children with autism. Now, she has every degree. She is a doctor, a psychiatrist. She also has an autistic child at home. And in her book, she is combining all of those pieces. Now, this isn't easy. It can be a challenge to combine your story with your expertise. But what I can tell you is by combining all of these pieces, when you read her book, it not only teaches you something about the nature of autism, it teaches you something about the nature in general of neurodiversity, teaches you about the genetics of things like this, and it teaches you about how culture interacts with autism, interacts with neurodivergence. These are things that actually really help to pull out the best in what she's trying to say. But more importantly, they make that idea unique. How many books do we have on the topic of neurodiversity? And now we get a book that is not only from someone who is an expert on paper, but an expert in their lived experience. Well, y'all, this is an amazing book, right? This is an amazing contribution to be able to make to the world, to the people you want to speak to the book industry, to whoever you're trying to contribute to. So, as you are moving through, I want you to really be thinking about how can you do something like this? Even if you are a PhD, PsyD, every degree, how can your story really help to boost and amplify what you're trying to say? It is not going to take away from those degrees, those defined expertise, but it will help you to really pull that uniqueness in and create that connection with your reader. Okay, if any of this is something that I can help with, as I mentioned earlier, we do offer idea development, really help you hone in your idea, both as a VIP day and as a monthly engagement. You can reach out. I'm happy to send you more information. Make sure that you're going to be a really good fit for that offer before we get started and get you on the road to a really solid outline for your book and a writing plan that's actually going to get that book in your hands, published, and as excellent as I know you want it to be. Reach out if I can help. I would love to hear about your book idea. And until then, happy writing. I'm Dr. Amanda Nell Edgar, the founder of Page and Podium Press. Every expert author's book is unique. And one of the things that we in the book industry are called to do is to draw out that uniqueness and meet every author where they are. And that's why I created the Expert Author Quiz. This freebie is going to give you a chance to go through the most common questions that I use to diagnose where folks are on their book journey. The quiz takes 3 to 5 minutes, and when you're done, you'll get a full readout of other authors just like you who have made it big in the industry, as well as the strengths you've got, the likely weaknesses along the way, and of course, some practical, personalized advice on how to best move forward. You can take the quiz now at pageandpodium.com/quiz.